My name is William Davis, and for 30 years I sacrificed everything for my son's future. I taught him values, paid for his education, supported his dreams. I thought I was raising a man of character. Then, at his company barbecue, in front of 23 people, Michael introduced me as my father who never understood technology, and said I represent the old generation that got left behind. Everyone stared. No one said a word. I sat there, silent, feeling smaller than I had in decades. But what Michael didn't know was that I had been playing a very long game. 3 days later, I made a phone call that would teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. You won't believe what happened next. But first, let me tell you how a factory worker became a silent billionaire. I grew up in a blue-collar family in Ohio. My father worked the steel mills. My mother cleaned houses. Education wasn't something we could afford to prioritize. But I was curious about everything, especially when computers started appearing in the early 80s. In 1985, I saved 3 months of factory wages to buy my first computer. A Commodore 64. Michael was only 5 years old then. While he slept, I taught myself programming. Basic at first, then more complex languages. The manual was thick. The screen was green. But something about that machine made sense to me. My wife thought I was wasting money. The neighbors thought I was crazy. But every night after my factory shift, I sat at that small desk. I learned how circuits worked, how software talked to hardware, how data moved through systems. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I was just fascinated. By 1990, I understood computers better than most college graduates. Michael would watch me sometimes. He'd ask questions. I'd explain what I was doing. Back then, he seemed impressed by his old man's knowledge. My first investment changed everything. In 1995, a young programmer from my factory started a small software company. He needed investors. $5,000 minimum. That was Michael's college fund. Every penny I'd saved for 8 years. But something told me this kid had vision. His software automated inventory management. Simple concept. Revolutionary execution. I knew factories. I knew this would work. I wrote the check on a Friday night. Didn't tell my wife, didn't tell Michael. Just quietly became a 10% owner of TechStream Solutions. 18 months later, Microsoft bought the company. My $5,000 became $150,000 overnight. Michael was applying to colleges then. When the tuition bills came, I paid them without blinking. He assumed I'd gotten a promotion at the factory. I let him think that. That Microsoft money became my seed capital. I started reading everything about technology investments, business journals, startup magazines, annual reports. I learned how venture capital worked, how angel investors operated, how to spot good management teams. I developed a system. Research companies thoroughly. Meet the founders personally. Never invest more than I could afford to lose. That was just the beginning. By 2000, I had invested in 12 different startups. 8 succeeded. 4 failed completely. But the 8 that succeeded more than compensated for the failures. My portfolio grew to $400,000, then $800,000, then $1.2 million. I kept working at the factory, kept living in the same house, kept driving the same pickup truck. Nobody suspected anything. Michael graduated college debt-free. He assumed I'd taken loans. I never corrected him. When he got his first job at a tech company, he'd call me with stories about his work. He'd explain new technologies like I'd never heard of them before. I'd listen patiently, ask simple questions, let him feel smart. Meanwhile, I was funding companies that were developing those exact technologies. I understood market trends better than most professional analysts. I could predict which innovations would succeed because I understood both the technical and practical sides. Michael never asked where his college money came from. Never wondered how a factory worker could afford such things. He was focused on his own career, his own success. I was funding his future without him knowing. Beat 5. The Secret Fortune. 240 words. Between 2005 and 2015, my investment strategy evolved. I started using shell companies to hide my identity, created LLCs with generic names, hired lawyers to structure complex deals. The paperwork was thick, the legal fees were expensive, but the anonymity was worth it. Technology was exploding. Social media, cloud computing, mobile applications. Every sector was ripe for investment. I had the experience to spot winners early. My portfolio reached $20 million. Then $50 million, then 150 million. I funded 35 different startups during those 10 years. Most people have never heard their names, but they use their products every day. Apps on their phones, software in their cars, systems that run their banks. By 2018, my total portfolio value hit $890 million. $890 million. I was technically almost a billionaire, a factory worker from Ohio who understood technology better than most Silicon Valley executives. Michael had no idea. Neither did his wife. Neither did anyone in my family. I lived the same quiet life, same modest house, same old clothes, same careful spending habits. But I was watching the technology sector like a hawk, waiting for the right opportunity, the perfect investment. One company would change everything. In 2018, Michael called me with exciting news. He was starting his own company, InnovateTech Solutions, software automation for manufacturing plants. He had industry connections, technical expertise, a solid business plan, but he needed capital, $3.2 million for the first 2 years. He'd been rejected by 4 venture capital firms. They said his market was too niche, too specialized, not scalable enough for their portfolios. Michael was devastated. This was his dream, his chance to prove himself as an entrepreneur. I listened to his pitch over dinner, asked detailed questions about his technology, his target customers, his revenue projections. Everything made sense to me. I understood manufacturing. I understood software. This was exactly the kind of innovation factories needed. 3 days later, Michael got a call from Meridian Capital Partners. They wanted to invest. Full funding, favorable terms, no strings attached. Michael was ecstatic. He'd never heard of Meridian Capital. Neither had most people. It was one of my shell companies. The investment documents were complex, multiple layers of corporate structure, proxy voting agreements, distribution waterfalls. Michael's lawyers reviewed everything. They said it was standard venture capital language. Michael signed everything without reading the fine print. Michael thought he did it all himself. Over the next 2 years, InnovateTech grew rapidly. Michael was a capable CEO. His product worked. His customers were satisfied. Revenue increased every quarter, but growing companies need additional capital, equipment, office space, more employees, marketing budgets. Michael raised 4 more investment rounds. Each time, Meridian Capital Partners participated. Each time, I increased my ownership percentage. Michael focused on operations. I focused on corporate structure. By 2020, the ownership breakdown was clear. Michael owned 35%. His employees owned 14% through stock options. Various shell companies controlled the remaining 51%. All those shell companies traced back to me, through lawyers, through trusts, through corporate entities that existed only on paper. I owned controlling interest in my son's company. Legal control, voting control, decision-making authority. Michael had no idea. His lawyers had no idea. Even some of my lawyers didn't understand the complete structure. I could change everything with one phone call. But I didn't want control for its own sake. I wanted to see what kind of man Michael would become. Would success make him humble or arrogant? Would he remember where he came from? Would he treat people with respect? I was conducting an experiment in character. I wanted to see who he'd become. Michael's personal life improved along with his business success. He married Jessica in 2019, bought a house in an expensive neighborhood, started driving luxury cars. The house down payment was $200,000. Michael had saved $50,000. The rest came from a family loan that I provided through another shell company. The paperwork looked official. Interest rates, payment schedules, legal documentation. Michael never paid a single payment. I forgave the debt quietly through corporate restructuring. Their wedding cost $120,000. Michael's company provided a retention bonus that covered the expenses. Another shell company transaction that flowed back to my portfolio. Jessica's engagement ring, their honeymoon in Europe, Michael's new BMW, all funded indirectly through dividend distributions and corporate benefits that I orchestrated. Michael thought he was earning everything through his business success. He'd tell people about his self-made journey, how he built his company from nothing, how hard work and determination paid off. I'd sit at family dinners listening to these stories, nodding politely, acting impressed by his achievements. Inside, I felt proud but also concerned. Success was changing him. He was becoming more confident, more assertive, sometimes more dismissive of people he considered less successful. I wanted to see who he really was underneath. Christmas dinner 2022 was the first time I noticed the shift in Michael's attitude. We were sitting around the table. Jessica's parents were visiting, successful people. Her father ran a law firm. Her mother was a pediatric surgeon. Impressive credentials, intimidating personalities. I was telling a story about my early computer programming, how I learned Fortran from library books, how different technology was in the 80s. Michael interrupted me mid-sentence. "Dad, nobody cares about your old stories." The table went quiet. Jessica's parents looked uncomfortable. My wife stared at her plate. Michael continued eating like nothing happened. Jessica didn't defend me. Nobody said anything. I finished my dinner in silence, helped clear the dishes, said goodnight politely. But something had changed. My son had publicly dismissed me, treated my experiences like they were worthless, showed disrespect in front of people whose opinions mattered to him. I told myself it was just stress, new marriage, growing business, financial pressure. Young men say things they don't mean. But I started watching more carefully. I should have seen the pattern. 6 months later, Michael got promoted to Senior Vice President at InnovateTech. He was essentially promoting himself, but the title made him feel important. He threw a party at his office, invited colleagues, industry contacts, potential clients. I attended to support him, wore my best suit, brought a congratulatory card. When Michael introduced me to his colleagues, his tone was condescending. "This is my dad. He still uses a flip phone." Everyone laughed. Michael smiled like he'd made a clever joke. "He doesn't understand social media, thinks Instagram is a telegram service." More laughter. I stood there smiling politely while my son made me the punchline. Technology moves so fast now. Older generations can't keep up. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. My hands were shaking slightly. 20 people were staring at me with amused expressions. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, looked at my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back looked old, tired, diminished. When I returned to the party, Michael was telling another story about something foolish I'd supposedly said about computers. It was getting harder to stay quiet. Father's Day 2023 was the breaking point I didn't recognize at the time. Michael and Jessica invited me to dinner at an expensive restaurant. I thought it was a gesture of respect, a way to honor our relationship. Michael gave me a generic gift card to Home Depot. $50, still in the store bag. "At least you can't mess up buying screws and nails," he said to Jessica. She laughed. They had a private conversation like I wasn't sitting there. "My dad never really figured out how to be successful," Michael told her. "Good thing I inherited Mom's business sense." "Some people just aren't built for achievement," Jessica agreed. I was sitting 3 feet away. They were talking about me like I was invisible. "I worry about him when he gets older," Michael continued. "He'll need a lot of help with basic things." My heart was pounding. My mouth was dry. I wanted to stand up and walk away. But I sat there, smiled, pretended I wasn't hearing every word. When dinner ended, Michael paid the check with his corporate credit card, the one funded by my shell company. The final insult was coming. Over the next few months, Michael's attitude became consistently dismissive. He'd correct me when I spoke about technology. He'd explain basic concepts like I'd never heard them before. He'd share my amusing observations with his friends. At family gatherings, he'd tell stories about my supposed technological ignorance, how I struggled with smartphones, how I didn't understand modern business practices. Michael was building a narrative. His success story required a contrast. He needed someone to represent the old way of thinking, the outdated approach, the generation that got left behind. I became his example of what not to be. Meanwhile, his company continued growing. Revenue hit $15 million annually. He hired 40 employees, opened offices in 3 cities. Every success made him more confident, more willing to publicly diminish the people who supposedly held him back. He started calling himself self-made in interviews. Business magazines wrote articles about his bootstrap journey. He gave speeches about overcoming obstacles and family limitations. I read every article, watched every interview, listened to every speech. He never mentioned anyone who helped him, never acknowledged any support, never showed gratitude for anything. He had no idea what was about to happen. The company barbecue was supposed to be Michael's triumph. InnovateTech had just signed their biggest contract ever, $23 million over 3 years. He wanted to celebrate with employees, investors, and industry partners. I arrived early to help set up, carried folding chairs, arranged tables, hung decorations like any proud father would. The guest list was impressive. Venture capitalists from Chicago, technology executives from Detroit, potential acquisition partners from Silicon Valley. Michael had been preparing his speech for weeks. He wanted to tell the story of InnovateTech's success, his vision, his leadership, his achievement. When he introduced me to the investors, I felt optimistic. Maybe he'd acknowledge my support. Maybe he'd show some respect in front of important people. Instead, he made me his cautionary tale. "This is my father, William," he announced to the group. "He represents the old generation that never understood technology." 23 people turned to look at me. I felt my face burning. My dad still thinks computers are too complicated. He's never sent an email in his life. Several people chuckled. I tried to smile. He represents everything that technology disrupted. The manual processes, the resistance to change, the fear of innovation. The laughter was louder now. I was the entertainment. Fortunately, I inherited my business sense from my mother's side of the family. My heart was hammering against my ribs. My hands were cold and shaking. I looked around the group. Everyone was staring at me with amused pity. Nobody defended me. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Jessica was smiling like this was perfectly normal. Michael continued his presentation, used me as the example of outdated thinking that his company had overcome. I stood there for 10 more minutes. Then I quietly walked to my car. 23 people stared at me in silence. I sat in my car for 30 minutes before starting the engine. My whole body was shaking, not from anger, from something deeper. Humiliation mixed with clarity. For 3 years I had watched my son transform into someone I didn't recognize, someone who treated respect like a luxury he couldn't afford to give his own father. I had funded his entire life, his education, his business, his house, his wedding, his success. He thought he was self-made. He thought I was irrelevant. He thought he could use me as a punchline without consequences. I drove home in complete silence, parked in my garage, sat in the darkness for another hour. Then I walked into my house, went to my home office, turned on my computer. The screen displayed my investment portfolio. $890 million. 35 companies. 15 years of careful planning. I opened the corporate structure files for InnovateTech Solutions. Reviewed the ownership percentages, the voting agreements, the proxy controls. Michael owned 35% of his company. He thought that made him the controlling shareholder. He was wrong. I scrolled through the shell company documents. Meridian Capital Partners, Northbridge Investment Group, Strategic Growth Fund, Technical Innovation Partners. All of them traced back to me. All of them voted according to my instructions. I controlled 51% of InnovateTech Solutions. I controlled my son's entire business. I picked up my phone, dialed my investment manager. "Richard, it's William Davis. I need you to schedule an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. Is there a problem with one of the portfolio companies?" "No," I said quietly. "There's a problem with my son." That's when I made my choice. Monday morning, I sat in my home office reviewing 25 years of documentation. Investment agreements from 1995, corporate structure diagrams, proxy voting forms, legal opinions from 3 different law firms. Everything was perfectly organized. Every transaction was properly documented. Every corporate entity was legally established. I had built this structure to protect my privacy, to keep my investments separate from my personal life, to maintain anonymity in a world that would have treated me differently if they knew my net worth. Now I was going to use it to teach my son a lesson. I called my lawyer first. Jonathan Mitchell had handled my corporate affairs for 15 years. He understood the complete structure better than anyone. "William, what exactly are you planning?" "I want to exercise my voting control at InnovateTech Solutions." "That's your right as majority shareholder. What changes do you want to make?" "I want Michael removed as CEO." Long pause. "That's a significant decision. Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure about anything." "The board will require documentation, justification, a transition plan. I'll provide everything necessary." We spent 2 hours reviewing the corporate governance procedures, board voting requirements, executive removal protocols, shareholder notification rules. Everything was legal, everything was enforceable, everything was inevitable. I had more power than Michael ever imagined. Tuesday morning, I received the board meeting agenda. 6 items, standard quarterly review topics. I requested an additional item. Discussion of executive leadership performance and potential organizational restructuring. Corporate language for, your son is about to be fired. I spent the rest of the week preparing my presentation. Financial performance analysis, market position assessment, competitive landscape review. InnovateTech was actually performing well. Revenue was strong. Customer satisfaction was high. Employee retention was excellent. This wasn't about business performance. This was about character, about respect, about understanding where success really comes from. I also prepared the human resources documentation, Michael's employment contract, severance package calculations, benefits continuation procedures. I wasn't trying to destroy his life. I was trying to save his soul. Friday evening, I called Richard again. Everything is arranged for Monday. The proxy representatives will attend in person. The voting outcome is predetermined. William, you realize this will change your relationship with Michael forever. My relationship with Michael is already broken. He broke it when he decided I wasn't worth respecting. There might be other ways to handle this. I've tried patience. I've tried understanding. I've tried unconditional support. None of that worked. And if he apologizes afterward? Then we'll see if he means it. I hung up the phone, sat in my chair, looked out the window at the quiet street. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, Michael would learn that success without character is just expensive failure. Monday would change everything. Monday morning, 9 a.m., InnovateTech conference room. Michael arrived early, carrying his presentation materials, quarterly reports, growth projections, strategic initiatives. He looked confident, relaxed, ready to impress the board with another successful quarter. The proxy representatives arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. 3 men in expensive suits, corporate lawyers with briefcases full of documentation. Michael had met them before during investment rounds. Pleasant conversations, standard due diligence meetings, routine paperwork reviews. He assumed they were there to approve additional funding. Maybe discuss expansion opportunities. Possibly explore acquisition possibilities. Gentlemen, welcome back, Michael said. I think you'll be impressed with our Q3 performance. The lead representative, James Morrison, spoke first. Mr. Davis, thank you for your time. We're here today to discuss some significant changes to the company's executive structure. Michael's expression shifted slightly. Changes? What kind of changes? Before we begin, I need to clarify the voting control structure of InnovateTech Solutions. Morrison opened his briefcase, removed a thick folder of documents. These are the corporate ownership records, updated as of this morning. He handed the folder to Michael. As you can see, Meridian Capital Partners, Northbridge Investment Group, Strategic Growth Fund, and Technical Innovation Partners collectively control 51% of voting shares. Michael scanned the documents quickly. His face was getting pale. Michael's face went white. I don't understand, Michael said. These companies have different names, different addresses, different corporate structures. Morrison continued calmly. All 4 entities are controlled by the same beneficial owner. All voting decisions are coordinated through a single management agreement. Who is the beneficial owner? Morrison handed him another document. This is the Consolidated Ownership Report. Michael read the name at the top of the page. His hands started shaking. William Davis, primary beneficial owner, voting control, 51%. That's impossible. My father doesn't have money for these kinds of investments. Your father has been an active angel investor since 1995. His portfolio currently includes 35 companies with a total value of $890 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb. $890 million. Michael looked at the proxy representatives like they were speaking a foreign language. You're saying my father owns my company? Your father provided all the initial funding for InnovateTech Solutions, every investment round, every capital infusion, every growth initiative. But I earned this. I built this company. I made it successful. You built an excellent company, Mr. Davis, but you built it with your father's money. Michael stared at the documents. His entire self-made narrative was crumbling, but that was just the beginning. Morrison opened a second folder. Based on the majority shareholders' instructions, we're implementing immediate changes to the executive structure. What changes? Effective today, you are removed from the position of Chief Executive Officer. Michael's mouth fell open. You can't do that. The voting majority can absolutely do that. Corporate governance is very clear on this matter. I founded this company. I am this company. You founded this company with funding provided by your father. Legal ownership and corporate control belong to the shareholders. Morrison handed him another document. This is your new employment agreement. You'll continue as Senior Director of Product Development. Reporting to the new CEO. Who's the new CEO? Sandra Williams from Microsoft. She has extensive experience in enterprise software. She starts tomorrow. Michael was breathing hard. His face was red. His hands were clenched. I won't accept this. I'll fight it. I'll sue. That's your legal right. But the voting control is clearly documented. Every transaction was properly recorded. Every corporate action was legally executed. Morrison stood up. The other representatives followed. Your father asked me to give you this message. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. They walked out of the conference room. Michael couldn't believe what was happening. The changes were immediate and devastating. Michael's salary dropped from $150,000 to $60,000. His equity position decreased from 35% to 15%. His corporate credit card was canceled. His company car was repossessed. The house payments became impossible. The mortgage was $2,800 monthly. His new salary couldn't cover it. Jessica was furious. How could you let this happen? I didn't know. I had no idea about any of this. You're supposed to be the CEO. How do you not know who owns your own company? Michael tried calling the proxy representatives. They wouldn't take his calls. He hired a lawyer to review the corporate structure. The lawyer confirmed everything was legal and enforceable. He drove to his father's house 3 times. I wasn't home, or I didn't answer the door. Michael left voicemails, sent text messages, wrote emails. I didn't respond to any of them. The local business newspaper ran a story about the leadership change at InnovateTech. Founder steps down after investor restructuring. Michael's colleagues treated him differently. Some were sympathetic, others were confused. Most avoided him entirely. The industry rumors started immediately. Failed leadership, financial mismanagement, family problems. The dominoes were still falling. Thursday evening, Michael showed up at my front door. I let him in. We sat in my living room, the same room where he'd grown up, where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd watched baseball games together. Dad, we need to talk. I'm listening. How could you do this to me? I didn't do anything to you, Michael. I did something for you. You destroyed my career. You humiliated me in front of my employees. You ruined my reputation. I taught you a lesson about respect. This isn't about respect. This is about control. This is about power. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was 35 years old, successful, intelligent, but he still didn't understand. Michael, do you remember what you said about me at your company barbecue? I was just making conversation. You said I represented everything that technology disrupted. You said I never understood innovation. You used me as an example of failure. I didn't mean it personally. You humiliated me in front of 23 people. You made me a joke. You treated me like I was worthless. I was just trying to make a point about generational differences. And I'm just trying to make a point about gratitude. I wasn't finished teaching. 2 weeks later, I put my house on the market. Michael called when he saw the for sale sign. Dad, you can't leave. We need to work this out. There's nothing to work out, Michael. You showed me who you really are. I believe you. I made a mistake. I said some things I shouldn't have said. You made many mistakes, over many months. This wasn't one bad moment. This was a pattern. Where will you go? Florida. I bought a condo near Sarasota, close to the beach, quiet neighborhood. What about the family? What about holidays? What about your grandchildren? You made it clear that I don't fit into your successful life. I'm just honoring your wishes. The house sold in 6 days, cash offer, no contingencies. I packed 25 years of memories into a moving truck. Old photos, Michael's childhood artwork, report cards, baseball trophies. I kept some things, donated others, threw away the rest. On my last day in Ohio, I drove past InnovateTech's office building, saw Michael's car in the parking lot, saw the new company logo on the building. I felt sadness, but also relief. For the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend to be less than I was. I didn't have to hide my achievements. I didn't have to accept disrespect for the sake of family peace. I drove to the airport, flew to Florida, started a new life. I walked away from everything. Sarasota was everything Ohio wasn't. Warm weather, ocean views, people who didn't know my history. I joined an investment club, found people who understood technology, who respected experience, who valued knowledge over ego. For the first time in years, I could talk openly about my work, my investments, my successes, my failures. "You funded 35 startups?" asked Margaret, a retired pharmaceutical executive. 35 successful exits. I had 12 failures too. "What's your biggest winner?" "A cloud computing company I funded in 2009. Sold to Amazon for $400 million. My initial investment was $50,000. "That's incredible. How did you spot the opportunity?" "I understood the technology. I understood the market. I understood the management team." These conversations felt natural, normal. Nobody treated my knowledge like it was amusing or outdated. I started consulting with young entrepreneurs, sharing insights about technology investing, helping them avoid common mistakes. My expertise was valuable again. My experience mattered. My opinions were respected. I bought a small boat, learned to fish, took sailing lessons, joined a book club, volunteered at a literacy program. Simple pleasures, quiet satisfaction, self-respect restored. I missed my son, but I didn't miss the person he'd become. I missed my grandchildren, but I couldn't accept being treated like a joke in their presence. I missed family holidays, but I couldn't pretend that disrespect was normal. Every morning, I woke up in my condo, made coffee, sat on my balcony, watched the sunrise over the Gulf of Mexico. For the first time in years, I felt free. Meanwhile, Michael's life was falling apart. The new CEO, Sandra Williams, was competent but demanding. She questioned every decision, reviewed every process, challenged every assumption. Michael went from being the decision-maker to being an employee, someone who had to justify his ideas, someone who took orders instead of giving them. His reduced salary made the house payments impossible. He tried refinancing. The bank required proof of income. His new salary didn't qualify for the existing mortgage. He put the house on the market. In a declining market, with motivated seller pressure. Jessica was humiliated by the downsizing. Her friends asked questions. Why were they moving? What happened to Michael's company? Why was he working for someone else now? She filed for divorce 3 months after the board meeting. The divorce attorney asked about assets. Michael's equity in InnovateTech was worth less than their debts. The house would sell at a loss. His 401k was minimal. What about other investments? Business interests? Family money? There's nothing else. Your father appears to be quite wealthy. What about support from him? He's not providing any support. The divorce settlement gave Jessica half of nothing, but she also got primary custody of their children. Michael moved into a one-bedroom apartment, drove a used Honda, shopped at discount grocery stores. His colleagues treated him with polite sympathy. Former peers now managed him. Former subordinates had been promoted above him. The business magazines that had featured his success story now ignored him completely. Michael's world was crumbling. 6 months after the board meeting, Michael was drowning financially. Child support payments, apartment rent, car insurance, health insurance, basic living expenses. His $60,000 salary barely covered necessities. His former lifestyle had required 3 times that amount. He tried finding another job, but his reputation was damaged. Industry contacts avoided him. Networking events were awkward and painful. What happened at InnovateTech? Potential employers asked. How could he explain that his father secretly owned his company? That his entire success story was built on hidden family money? That he'd been removed by investors who turned out to be proxy representatives for his own father? The story sounded insane, unbelievable, like an excuse made up by someone who couldn't handle executive responsibility. Michael started drinking more, sleeping less, avoiding social situations. His apartment was small and depressing. Generic furniture, no personality, no signs of his former success. He'd drive past his old house sometimes, watch the new owners in the yard, see his children visiting their mother in a place that used to be his home. The company credit cards were gone. The business trips were gone. The executive perks were gone. The respect was gone. Everything he thought he owned had been taken away. But the worst part was the knowledge, the understanding that his father had been watching all along, funding everything, controlling everything. Michael had never been self-made. He'd never been independent. He'd never been in control. His entire identity was a lie. Everything he thought he owned was slipping away. The technology community in Ohio was small and interconnected. Word traveled fast about Michael's situation. Initially, people assumed it was a standard investor dispute, corporate politics, strategic differences, business disagreements. But gradually, the real story emerged. Michael's father was the mystery investor. The self-made entrepreneur had been funded by family money all along. The irony was delicious for people who enjoyed seeing arrogance punished. Did you hear about Michael Davis? Turns out his father owns his company. His father? The guy he used to make fun of? Same guy. Worth $900 million. Been hiding it for decades. Michael had no idea? None. Thought he was self-made. Used to give speeches about it. The story spread through business networks, investment groups, technology meetups. Michael became a cautionary tale. A joke. An example of how pride comes before a fall. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Industry contacts stopped returning calls. Professional relationships evaporated. Business conferences that had invited him to speak canceled his appearances. Magazines that had profiled his success refused his comments for follow-up articles. Michael's professional network collapsed almost overnight. At technology events, people would point him out, whisper about his situation, treat him like an object of pity or amusement. That's Michael Davis, the guy whose father secretly owned his company. The humiliation was complete and public. His former confidence was replaced by shame. His former assertiveness was replaced by defensiveness. His former success was replaced by failure. Everyone now knew the truth. Jessica's divorce proceedings were brutal and public. Her attorney painted Michael as someone who had misrepresented his financial position throughout their marriage, someone who had built their lifestyle on deception and hidden dependencies. My client believed she was marrying a successful entrepreneur. Instead, she was marrying someone whose father controlled every aspect of his business life. The asset division was simple because there weren't many assets to divide. The house sold at a loss. Michael's reduced equity position was nearly worthless. Their joint savings had been depleted by legal fees. Jessica got primary custody of their 2 children. Michael got supervised visitation rights 2 weekends per month. I don't want them exposed to his instability, Jessica told the court. He's demonstrated poor judgment and an inability to maintain employment. Michael's relationship with his children became strained and artificial. Awkward dinners at chain restaurants, forced activities at discount entertainment venues, conversations that felt scripted and uncomfortable. His 8-year-old daughter asked questions he couldn't answer. Why don't you live with us anymore? Why is mommy angry at you? Why don't you have a nice car anymore? Michael tried explaining that sometimes adults have disagreements, that families change, that he still loved them even though things were different. But how could he explain that their grandfather was a secret billionaire, that their father had been living a lie, that everything they thought they knew about their family was wrong? The children started preferring time with their mother. Weekend visits became obligations rather than celebrations. Michael felt like a stranger in his own children's lives. Michael had lost everything that mattered. One evening, Michael sat in his apartment looking through old photo albums, pictures from happier times, family vacations, holiday celebrations, graduation ceremonies. In every photo, his father was there, quiet, supportive, present. Michael remembered conversations they'd had over the years, times when his father had asked thoughtful questions about his business, moments when his father had offered subtle encouragement. Had his father been trying to connect? Had Michael been too arrogant to notice? He found a photo from his college graduation. His father was standing in the background, smiling proudly, Michael was posed in the foreground holding his diploma. The tuition for that degree had been $40,000. Michael had never asked where the money came from. He'd assumed his father had taken loans or made sacrifices. Now he knew the truth. His father had paid cash from his investment portfolio. Another photo from his wedding day. His father dancing with Michael's grandmother, looking happy and included. The wedding had cost $120,000. Michael had received a bonus from work that covered the expenses. He'd never questioned the timing or the amount. His father had funded that too. Photo after photo revealed the same pattern. His father present but quiet, contributing but invisible, supporting but unacknowledged. Michael started remembering specific moments, times when he'd dismissed his father's opinions, occasions when he'd corrected his father's statements, instances when he'd treated his father like an embarrassment, the company barbecue, the promotion party, Christmas dinner, Father's Day restaurant, a pattern of disrespect that had escalated over months and years. Michael finally understood what he'd lost. Not just money or business success, not just houses or cars or status. He'd lost the respect and love of the one person who had supported him unconditionally for 35 years. Finally, Michael understood. Michael spent 3 days writing a letter to his father. He wrote about his mistakes, his arrogance, his ingratitude, his blind spots. He explained that success had changed him in ways he hadn't recognized, that he'd become someone he didn't like, someone who treated the most important people poorly. He acknowledged every incident he could remember, every dismissive comment, every moment of disrespect, every time he'd made his father feel small or irrelevant. He apologized for the company barbecue specifically, for using his father as an example of failure, for humiliating him in front of important people. "I was wrong about everything. You weren't holding me back. You were lifting me up. You weren't outdated. You were ahead of your time. You weren't a failure. You were the most successful person I knew, and I was too blind to see it." Michael mailed the letter to his father's new address in Florida. Then he tried calling. The number was disconnected. He tried emailing. The messages bounced back. He contacted his father's old neighbors. They didn't have current contact information. Michael realized his father had completely cut off communication. Would it be too late? 3 weeks later, I received Michael's letter in Florida. I read it twice, then put it in my desk drawer. The apology was detailed and seemed genuine, but apologies are easy when someone has lost everything. True character is revealed when people have choices. For 25 years, I had given Michael every advantage: education, capital, opportunities, support. In return, he had given me public humiliation and private disrespect. One letter couldn't erase years of patterned behavior, but I wasn't heartless. He was still my son. Despite everything, I still loved him. I called him from a blocked number. "Dad." "Hello, Michael." "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for months. I got your letter. I meant every word. I was wrong about everything. I want to make it right." "Making it right will take time, Michael, and proof." "What kind of proof?" "Show me that you've learned. Show me that you can treat people with respect. Show me that success won't corrupt you again." "How do I do that?" "Figure it out. That's part of the lesson." I hung up. This was Michael's last chance. Michael took a job as a junior software developer at a small company. Entry-level position, modest salary, no management responsibilities. He could have been bitter about the demotion. Instead, he focused on learning humility. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions instead of assuming he knew better. He treated administrative assistants and janitors with the same respect he showed executives. When colleagues complained about their bosses, Michael stayed quiet. When they criticized company policies, he offered constructive alternatives. He started volunteering at a literacy program, teaching computer skills to seniors. Many of them reminded him of his father. People with life experience who deserved respect regardless of their technological knowledge. Michael bought a small house in a modest neighborhood, furnished it simply, lived within his means. He called his children regularly, attended their school events, focused on being present rather than providing expensive experiences. Slowly, his relationship with them improved. They started looking forward to his visits. He didn't try contacting his father again, but he lived each day trying to become someone his father could respect. Some lessons cost everything to learn. 2 years later, I received another letter from Michael. This one was different. It wasn't asking for forgiveness or making excuses. It was simply updating me on his life, his new job, his volunteer work, his relationship with his children, his efforts to rebuild his character. He included a photo of himself teaching computer skills to elderly students. He looked happy, genuine, humble. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just trying to become someone worthy of forgiveness." I called him that evening. "Dad, I got your letter. I didn't expect you to call. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of the work you're doing. Thank you. Would you like to visit Florida sometime? See my new place?" "I'd like that very much." "Good. We'll start there." I didn't restore his position at InnovateTech. I didn't give him money. I didn't make his problems disappear. But I gave him something more valuable, a chance to earn back what he'd lost through his own efforts. I taught my son that success without character is just expensive failure, and sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. But before I tell you, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice served quietly. What would you do in my situation? Would you stay silent or teach them a lesson? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about standing up for yourself, subscribe for more tales of quiet justice. Next week, I'll share another story about someone who got the last laugh when nobody expected it.